Have you ever wondered why Obi-Wan looks like he aged 40 years in A New Hope from episode 3, when in reality it's only been 19? Or what about on the opposite end of the spectrum where we have Katan, who looks like she aged 5 years when it's actually been 28?
They've gone too far.
While I might not be able to give official reasons for all of these, today in this video I will be analyzing a spectrum of characters from those who aged too much to those who didn't age enough, while providing in-universe reasons behind these inaccuracies when I can. And make sure to tell me in the comments if there are any I missed. Starting with Admiral Yularen, we have a devastating transformation from Season 1 of the Clone Wars in 22 BBY to Season 7 of the Clone Wars in 19 BBY, where it is very clear the war was quite taxing on old Yularen here. Not to mention, 14 years later, he's looking like Colonel Sanders with that white hair in the ISB. It seems nonsensical that he could have aged that much in such a short amount of time, but then again, if we look to history, there are cases of wars having devastating effects on certain generals, like Robert E. Lee, who was the leading Confederate general during the American Civil War, that died 5 years after its end from a stroke despite only being 63. Based off of the Tarkin novel, Yularen is around Tarkin's age, or a little bit older, making him roughly 42 at the beginning of the Clone Wars, 45 during the end, and 59 when working for the ISB in Star Wars Andor. Another character who aged terribly because of the Clone Wars is Kit Fisto, who, before getting turned into sushi by Darth Sidious, looked like he had, let's just say, seen some things during the war. Also from the Clone Wars is Gerrera, who went from looking like a 23-year-old freedom fighter on Onderon to a 70-year-old cyborg just over 20 years later, and it's probably from all the pre-workout he's been inhaling from his suit. Well, it's either that or death sticks. Not sure which one, but yeah, he definitely doesn't have any right to have a full bushy white beard here. And we don't have any official canon birth date for him, so everything is essentially speculation. And speaking of that stuff he inhales all the time, am I the only one that was very confused about that episode in the new Andor season where he made Wilman inhale the stuff too? Like, I didn't really get what was going on there, but I don't know, it was a cool scene regardless. Next up is Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is 38 years old in 19 BBY, which is when Revenge of the Sith takes place, and 57 in 0 BBY, which is when A New Hope takes place. Only problem is, he looks like a 30-year-old Ewan McGregor in Revenge of the Sith, with a little bit of gray hair on his sideburns, and like a 60 to 70-year-old Alec Guinness in A New Hope. The obvious explanation here is different actors and different healthcare back in the 70s for 60-year-old Alec Guinness, but what about in-universe? Well, in the Darth Plagueis novel and Ahsoka novel, we hear that Tatooine's conditions actually make people age faster. So this, plus the fact that he was under constant stress and depression from the death of friends and the Purge of the Jedi, all made Ben look to have aged over 30 years. And if I'm being honest, I think people kind of overhype how old Obi-Wan looks here. I mean, yeah, Alec Guinness did have white hair, but at the same time, he doesn't really look that much older than 60. But Count Dooku, on the other hand, is much more reasonable than these previous characters, but arguably is still unrealistic, as in Tales of the Jedi in 32 BBY, he has brown and full hair and beard, but in 22 BBY, 10 years later, his hair is white and receding. This isn't that crazy of a jump, but the fact that this is supposed to be a 70-year-old Dooku here kind of is. And unlike Obi-Wan and Saw Gerrera, and sure, Kit Fisto too, he wasn't fighting in some major galactic war, but rather was in one of the most peaceful eras of this portion of galactic history. But going over to the original trilogy, we have Luke Skywalker, who is simply our middle of the spectrum as he ages neither too fast nor too slow. In A New Hope, he is 19 years old and looks to be about 19, if maybe a little bit older. In The Empire Strikes Back, he is 22 and definitely looks that old, and like he aged 3 years, especially with his motorcycle accident that transformed his face in between those movies. And in Return of the Jedi, Luke is 23 and doesn't appear to have aged very much from the last one. In The Last Jedi, it is 34 ABY, making Luke 53 years old. I would say he looks pretty bad for 53, but then again, he is living on an island as a hermit. Katan is pretty much the polar opposite of the previous characters, as she goes from looking like this in the Clone Wars in 20 BBY to this in The Mandalorian, which is in 9 ABY, so 29 years later. She doesn't have a canon age or birthday, but in my opinion, she looks like she aged 5 or maybe 10 years between these two, not 29, so maybe Dave Filoni should have given her aged makeup for the series. Maybe there's something about the Mandalorian routine that keeps them very healthy and fresh, what do I know? Next is Anakin Skywalker. Okay, hear me out. Anakin went from looking like a 23-year-old man in Revenge of the Sith to a 23-year-old man in Return of the Jedi, which takes place 23 years later. Okay, obviously this is a joke considering he was a Force ghost that took on the form of the last time Anakin was himself before his death, but there also is the original Sebastian Shaw Force ghost, which made Anakin look 60 rather than 46 like he should be. And if they had Hayden play Anakin as his older self like we saw in Ahsoka, then he would be just about perfect for that age range now. But real quick, here's the Christian advice of this video. If you want to get back to the main video, then you can skip to this time right here. Now today, I just started Matthew in the New Testament, which I am pretty excited about because I've been reading the Old Testament and Apocrypha for quite some time. And in here, I found a passage I found very interesting, where in Matthew 1:21 it says, "She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." Now this is of course an angel of the Lord talking to Joseph here, and I find this interesting because Joseph obeys this without question or even understanding as to what's really going on. And this is kind of representative of what we should do in our lives. When the Lord talks to us and communicates to us and gives us signs, we really should obey without question. Now this is very difficult to do, and I will say that in times where you're conflicted, sometimes the best thing to do is to kind of just, take a breath, think about what's going on, and just try and analyze what is the most faithful thing to do and what the Lord wants you to do based off of the scripture and what signs have been given to you. But getting back to the video, just a quick reminder to leave a comment on this video if there's any characters I missed, and yeah, let's get right back into it. And after looking at characters that age too fast, too slow, and just right, I also wanted to mention a particularly special case of aging in the movies, where Palpatine actually ages backwards, looking older in Attack of the Clones than he does in Revenge of the Sith. This actually has an interesting behind-the-scenes reason for it. George Lucas originally wanted Palpatine's transformation into the Emperor we see in Return of the Jedi to be through a gradual process of extreme aging from the corruption of the dark side, so in Attack of the Clones, Ian McDiarmid was made to look even older than he was by giving him features like wispy hair and liver spots. When Revenge of the Sith rolled around, and George decided to have Sheev get deformed by his own lightning in an attack from the Jedi, Palpatine was made to look less aged, which actually made him look younger than in Episode 2. Continuity errors are naturally going to occur in movies, and whether we excuse them with the Tatooine sun or the stress of war, they usually aren't enough to break your engagement if the storytelling is good enough. But it's definitely an aspect of movies that always bugs me personally. Like, why can't directors just make the characters accurately age? I feel like it would really make the movies more engaging. But anyway, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this one, then you might also like this video I did where I looked at how many deaths are in each Star Wars movie. But yeah, see ya.